One of the more common themes that I've observed in critical comments on my videos is that it's just fiction, bro. Why would I find these characters inspiring? They're made up. Anyone can create a perfect paragon of masculinity who always does the right thing in every circumstance, so why should I care about Iroh or Sir Duncan or Samwise Gamgee? Why are you taking life advice from video games? That's childish. This video isn't really a response to those critiques. I mean, it is, but not because I'm trying to convince my detractors to change their minds. This is the internet, after all. There are precious few bigger wastes of time than arguing with strangers online. Instead, this video is for those of you with more open minds who might read those comments and wonder if they have a point. They don't. It's just fiction, it's just fantasy, it's just a fairy tale. Granted, those are all true statements. Do they, therefore, mean that fictional stories should not inspire or change us? Or, more fundamentally, that art is not supposed to affect us? Or that it does not matter how we spend our time? The answer to that third question is obviously, don't be stupid. How we choose to spend our days absolutely matters, and a significant portion of our waking hours is spent consuming stories. Even if you haven't picked up a book in ages and have somehow sworn off streaming entirely, you still hear and read stories constantly. The news is an unending serial. Your Twitter feed is chock full of mini narratives, from amusing personal anecdotes to dramatic tales of daring and danger from the other side of the world, or the moon. When you hang out with your spouse, your friends, or your coworkers, you spend much of that time swapping stories back and forth, whether it's about your kids, your vacations, your misadventure at the grocery store, or your latest D&D session. Point being, stories and storytelling are inherent within our nature. We cannot help but tell them, nor can we prevent ourselves from being ensnared and sucked in by masters at this craft. So, if how we spend our time matters, and it obviously does, and we spend much of that time engaged in the art of storytelling, and we obviously do, then said art does matter, or at least it should. Art is supposed to affect us. That is one of its central functions. If it were merely intended for self-expression, it would never need to be displayed in museums, bound between book covers, or shown on the silver screen. When we experience a work of art, we are supposed to feel something. Inspired, convicted, enlightened, emboldened, whatever. Why else would we bother spending our limited time with a story if it were not going to make us feel something, if it were not going to change us in some way? If you are looking merely to feel sated, to let your eyes glaze over for an hour or 6, and to not remember a thing about what you read or watched in that time span, may I introduce you to social media addiction? Oh, it'll still change you, just not in any way any person on Earth has ever wanted to be changed. I suppose that sounds a bit hypocritical, coming from a person currently talking in a YouTube video, but there's one little trait, one particular aspect of our mindsets that makes all the difference in the world as we engage in the internet writ large. Intentionality. Are we choosing what videos to watch because we think they will be meaningful, fruitful, or at least creative and funny, or because they happen to be the next one in our shorts feed? Are we taking time to read the tweets in our feed and think about their contents, or are we scrolling at light speed until something randomly catches our eye, then firing off a snarky quote tweet before moving on to the next thing? Are we watching shows that are written for people staring at their phones, or those that demand the audience's attention? Are we playing games that provide us with constant hits of dopamine, or those that draw us deeper, asking us to engage with the story, characters, and world so that they might give us far more than a few moments of happy brain juice? Saying it's just fiction is like saying it's just food. What we put into our bodies and minds matters. The quantity and quality of both has a tremendous effect on shaping who we are. Okay, but what about the second critique? The assertion that it's silly to find highly virtuous characters inspiring because anyone can dream up such a man, that these people don't have to contend with what I have to deal with in my own life, which is decidedly more complicated than theirs. I would ask you, dear viewer, to answer this simple question. If anyone can create such a character, where are they? Take a look at modern fiction, especially modern fantasy. This genre is supposed to be where you would find this archetype. The courageous man who never falters under pressure, who wields his weapon with unmatched skill, who rejects temptation and renounces despair, who loves with fierce devotion and unyielding loyalty. Where are those men? Is our current culture producing such heroes? Or are we creating the acolyte? And yes, there are, thankfully, exceptions. I cannot tell you how thrilled I was at the pure goodness of Sir Duncan the Tall in A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. But sadly, that show is an exception to the rule. Why are we seeing this? Why are so many stories, even in the fantasy genre, so devoid of true heroism? Why have battles between good and evil been largely replaced by conflicts between two morally gray sides, which usually just means the writers have made the good guys bad now? Why do fantasy worlds seem every bit as dim and grim as our own? Because you cannot write that which you do not understand. You've probably heard it said, write what you know, which is advice easily taken the wrong way. I guess I just have to write about suburban dad life. Yay. No, I think write what you know should be applied in a more metaphysical and philosophical fashion. Write about ideas with which you are familiar and concepts you understand. If you put it that way, then you only can write what you know. J.R.R. Tolkien served in World War I at the Battle of the Somme. He saw true heroism firsthand, along with a lot of horrors. So he wrote about them, but more importantly, he wrote about all the good things that those heroes fought to preserve. And yes, that's the second video in a row that I'm making this reference to that part of his life. Get used to it. Have any authors or Hollywood writers today had anything close to such an experience? Precious few, I would imagine. I'm not saying you need to fight in a war to understand courage and sacrifice and thus to imbue such values into your work, but if you haven't, then you at least need to be a student of history to one extent or another. A common problem you may have heard about today is the cannibalization of fantasy. That is, new, upcoming, and aspiring authors are only inspired by other authors in the field. Pick up a fantasy book published anytime in the last few years. Is the magic system extremely detailed with hard and fast rules? Yeah, probably. That would be the Brandon Sanderson effect. There's nothing wrong with taking inspiration from other fantasy authors, of course. It's quite unavoidable, but your writing cannot only be derived from them, or it will be, well, derivative, a mishmash of existing stories and systems cobbled together in decidedly uninspired fashion. If you only understand modern fantasy, you can only write modern fantasy. Good writers need to read and be well versed in history, philosophy, psychology, and the humanities as a whole. You cannot live in your little world, be it urban, suburban, or rural, and create a whole new one if you refuse to explore beyond the boundaries of your everyday life. You need to be grounded in the whole of reality in order to create good fantasy. Fantasy is a natural human activity. It certainly does not destroy or even insult reason, and it does not either blunt the appetite for nor obscure the perception of scientific veracity. On the contrary, the keener and the clearer is the reason, the better fantasy it will make. If men were ever in a state in which they did not want to know or could not perceive truth, facts, and evidence, then fantasy would languish until they were cured. I dare say that quote from On Fairy Stories turned out quite prescient. Professor Tolkien gave us the diagnosis for a disease that he could not have known, not with certainty anyway, would have descended upon the genre which he, in a sense, fathered. If we are not grounded in reality, in truth, then we cannot create secondary worlds that reflect that truth. If we do not believe virtue and vice, good and evil, to be objective realities, then we will find ourselves incapable of creating stories about noble, courageous, and pure-hearted heroes and heroines because we don't believe in those things. This is what happens when you have a culture that has largely fallen for the postmodern lie that truth and morality are subjective and relative. It's why you have people on the internet playing defense for Freeren's demons, a race of beings shown to be purely and thoroughly evil, because these people do not believe in objective moral truth. It's why the MCU has descended from stories about heroes battling villains into tales of morally gray, that is, largely detestable anti-heroes whom the audience does not like and should not cheer for. So no, it is not true that anyone could make up a character such as Iroh or Aragorn. You need to understand what virtue is, what costs a man must pay to become virtuous, and why it matters to be good in the first place. People who do not believe in heroism cannot write heroes. Now, I will accept my critics' point that these characters are largely unrealistic. No man on earth is that selfless, that courageous, that humble, that magnanimous, that impeccable combination of gentle and ferocious. So what? Goodness is goodness. Virtue is virtue. Are we supposed to be discouraged when we see a man who can bench more than us or run a faster mile time? We might be, but that's our problem. The whole point of events like the Olympics is supposed to be inspire us to transcend our self-imposed limitations, to be more like those pinnacles of human performance, if only a little. Sure, Sam Gamgee lives in a fictional world where good and evil are clearer cut than they often are in the here and now, but his example still holds true. He is loyal to the end to those whom he loves. We can be too. His humility, his acceptance of the one small garden worked by his own two hands is endlessly applicable to our lives. You don't need to be able to sort out all the good and bad within the whole of society to know how you ought to act in any given moment. Sam himself was quite ignorant of the vast majority of the goings-on in Middle-earth, and applicability is, according to the professor himself, the main value of The Lord of the Rings when we look at how it affects our own lives. Tolkien was quite clear that his story was not allegorical, but he was equally adamant that it was applicable, that the journey of these fictional characters could mean something to his readers, that the story would stay with us long after we had closed the book. But hey, maybe characters with no real moral flaws aren't your thing. Maybe you like your heroes to be a little bit more grounded. You need to be able to relate to a man's weaknesses in order to be inspired by his journey. That's fine. I wouldn't necessarily endorse such a mindset, but I would understand where you're coming from. If you find Aragorn's example less inspiring or motivating than the arc of Arthur Morgan, I get it. Oh, sorry. I regret to inform you that Red Dead Redemption 2 is a video game, and therefore not that deep, and you are a baby for taking life advice from video games. Now, to be fair, I think I've only seen people say it's not that deep when referring to God of War, but it is that deep. It's insane that people have this prejudice against video games still in whatever year you happen to be watching this. Do we never stop to think about the people behind the product? Objectively, this is a story that was written by people, with characters voiced by people, captured in a digital medium by hundreds more people who worked countless hours to ensure there's not a single hair out of place in Kratos' beard and that Arthur's horse poops at regular intervals, though it never seems to while you're riding, which is inaccurate. A fun fact, horses can poop at a full gallop, but can only pee when standing still. That's like one of the only things I know about horses. Do you think that the people behind these games don't intend to inject any meaning into the stories they are creating? Unfortunately, it really seems as if some people, a shrinking subset of the populace, I hope, treat video games as these things that have no inherent value because they're video games. And yeah, if someone came up to me and told me that Candy Crush had changed his life, I would assume that could only mean it had tossed him headlong into a spiral of addiction, depression, and bankruptcy. But Red Dead and Candy Crush aren't exactly the same game, now are they? Again, think about the intention of the minds behind the games. What behaviors are the developers at King.com Limited trying to affect in their players? Pretty simple. Play longer. Spend more. I don't know how exactly I deleted Candy Crush off my phone the instant I finished recording that footage, but I have, in the past, thankfully, played enough mobile games to know that is the mindset. Design gameplay that is stimulating and neurologically rewarding, get players hooked, then limit how much they can play and or lock content or progression items behind a paywall. They give you money, you keep feeding them bursts of dopamine. Putting that type of game, and Red Dead Redemption 2 or God of War or Expedition 33 or 100 other games with rich narratives into the same category is like saying steak is bad for you because it is food, and jelly beans are also food. Were the developers at Rockstar remotely worried about keeping you captivated and stimulated at every single moment during Red Dead 2's campaign? No. Do you have any idea how much time you spend as Arthur just walking slowly? If you've played it, I know you do. This game and many, many others are designed to affect and change their players in meaningful ways. They explore profound themes about the nature of humanity and all the ways we love and use one another. They do not grab, but rather ask for the player's attention, rewarding those who explore the remote corners of the world and stop to examine seemingly minute details that were, in fact, the result of many hours of human labor. They tell stories about men and women who are broken and seeking to be whole, of fathers trying to love and desperately afraid of losing their children, of heroes willing to give their all, and villains consumed by the notion of having it all. People wrote these stories. People who have spent years thinking deeply about these concepts and ideas. People who want to show us truths about humanity and the world we live in, even in fantastic and mythical form. You don't have to agree with every point of a game's philosophy to appreciate the effort that went into making it, to value the depth of thought behind these stories. It honestly seems a little ridiculous to rebut a notion as ridiculous as video games are just entertainment and nothing more, but that mindset is not, I fear, quite as rare as I would like, especially with games now being used as a vehicle for whatever agenda may be in vogue. People will often say that they just want fun games, or that movies are just for enjoyment, as if all that matters is their brain is flooded with happy juice for a few hours. Perhaps they really mean that, or perhaps they are afraid to say that they want stories that speak to their beliefs. Well, let me say it, then. I want stories that speak to my beliefs. Why wouldn't I? I don't want merely to be assuaged and reassured, of course. I certainly would like to be challenged, to be urged to go deeper and ponder tougher questions, but yes, I want stories that generally align with my worldview. Duh. I do not want to just disassociate for a few hours and then turn my brain back on when I'm done. That is not proper escapism. And using escape in this way, critics have chosen the wrong word, and what is more, they are confusing, not always by sincere error, the escape of the prisoner with the flight of the deserter. To view movies, television, and video games as mere entertainment that takes us out of this world and provides temporary relief from our anxieties and problems, but doesn't actually move us even an inch towards solving them is foolish. It is, as Tolkien suggests, a cowardly and short-sighted retreat from the world that will do nobody any good. And I'm as guilty of doing this as anyone. I've spent countless hours on social media or playing games as pure diversion. There is a right way to do those things, don't get me wrong. Even games that could hardly be called philosophically rich, my most played Steam game of all time, for example. Just like there's a wrong way to play games like Red Dead 2. If I hear you've been skipping cutscenes, well, partner, we're gonna have to draw on each other. So if that's the flight of the deserter, then what is the escape of the prisoner? Tolkien doesn't say in so many words, though he writes quite a few about the modern atrocities of his day, the electric street lamp and internal combustion engine, to name a couple. So it's ultimately up to the reader of On Fairy Stories to come up with a more succinct explanation for the term. Here's mine. In short, the escape of the prisoner is about the chance to read, write about, or live in a world that is better than our own. We live in a prison of sorts, trapped by any number of modern inventions that promised to free us, but invariably have sucked away our time, our energy, and our very lives. It makes perfect sense to imagine a world where those horrible things do not exist, to think what life would be like for a man who never knew the shackles we live with. But we do not do so out of pure fancy, but to inspire us to cast off the chains that bind us in whatever way we can. The prisoner sits in his cell and dreams of life beyond his barred window, not merely because it brings him relief in the moment, but because he believes he can and will live such a life. And no, none of us will ever replicate the heroic deeds of our favorite fantasy protagonists, but we can imitate their lives nonetheless. We can grow in courage, embrace humility, and serve with genuine loyalty and love. That is how we become free. From vice, from depravity, from every form of wickedness we would impose upon ourselves or that is encouraged and promoted by the culture around us. Is that culture a prison? It certainly is designed to be one in many ways, but we need not let it hold us captive. What that looks like specifically will vary greatly from person to person, so I don't know exactly how you can break out, but I know this. We can escape. We can find our way home. And stories, well, stories might just help us find the way. Thank you for watching, liking, subscribing, and a special thank you to all my wonderful Patreon supporters. God bless, and I hope you have yourself a wonderful day.